The escape pod tumbled through space, its life support systems beeping in steady rhythm as Commander Eliza Chen drifted in and out of consciousness. For 9 days, she existed in this limbo, sustained only by emergency rations and the pod's recycled oxygen. Her dreams were haunted by the final moments she'd witnessed. The Nightingale breaking apart under Vraxian weapons fire, medical equipment, and personnel scattered into the void. When the UNSC Mercy finally located her pod, Chen was severely dehydrated but alive. Captain Rivera personally carried her to the medical bay. "The Nightingale?" she asked, already knowing the answer. "Total loss," Rivera confirmed. "You're the only survivor." Chen's recovery coincided with humanity's descent into collective rage. News broadcasts across Earth and her colonies showed the same footage on loop. The clearly marked medical frigate disintegrating under alien weapons fire. Political commentators demanded immediate military response. Military strategists calculated the cost of war with the Vraxian Imperium. 3 weeks after her rescue, Chen attended her first United Earth Security Council meeting, still wearing a medical exoskeleton to support her weakened muscles. The chamber fell silent as she walked to the podium. "The Vraxians must pay for this atrocity," General Okonkwo stated, addressing the council. Commander Chen's testimony confirms what we already know. This was an unprovoked attack on medical personnel. "We recommend immediate military action." All eyes turned to Chen. As sole survivor and chief medical officer, her words carried tremendous weight. "Before you decide," she said quietly, "I need to show you something the public hasn't seen." The holographic display activated, showing internal footage from the Nightingale's medical bay. The Vraxian dignitary, Emissary Drakvor, collapsed during negotiations, is breathing labored. Medical staff rushed to his side, deploying diagnostic equipment. "Our sensors detected a massive cerebrovascular event," Chen narrated. "The equivalent of a stroke in human terms. Protocol demanded immediate intervention." The footage showed doctors working frantically, administering treatments designed for human physiology but modified on the fly for Vraxian biology. 10 seconds later, the first torpedo hit, Chen continued. "They fired while we were trying to save their diplomat's life." President Okafor leaned forward. "You're saying this was a cultural misunderstanding." "I'm saying it was worse," Chen replied. "In reviewing Vraxian cultural briefings, I discovered that in their society, medical intervention is considered dishonorable. They leave their wounded to survive on their own strength or die trying. What we saw as life-saving care, they interpreted as an attack." The room erupted in angry discussion. Chen waited for silence before continuing. "We have 2 options. We can go to war over this fundamental misunderstanding, losing countless more lives, or we can show them why they're wrong, why healing matters." "What exactly are you proposing, Commander?" President Okafor asked. Chen looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of military leaders eager for retribution. "When we capture those responsible, and we will capture them, don't execute them, don't even imprison them. Sentence them to serve in our medical corps. Make them understand what they destroyed." Her proposal met stunned silence, then heated debate. But something in Chen's steady gaze, in the quiet determination of a healer who had lost everything yet still sought understanding, gradually shifted the room's energy. 3 days later, President Okafor announced humanity's response to the tragedy. "We will capture those responsible, and we will teach them to heal." Admiral Kravtov was escorted from the tribunal chamber under heavy guard, his scaled skin reflecting the flashing cameras of news drones that hovered persistently around him. The other 5 Vraxian officers followed, their postures rigid with military discipline even in defeat. None had expected to survive this long after capture. In the secure holding facility beneath the Geneva Justice Complex, Kravtov found himself in a sparsely furnished room with Commander Chen. The human woman's eyes held no hatred, only a determined focus that unsettled him more than rage would have. "Tomorrow you begin your reeducation," Chen said, placing a data tablet on the table between them. "You will study human medical protocols, anatomy, and ethics. You will learn to treat patients under supervision." Kravtov's translator relayed his response, the synthetic voice flat compared to the contempt in his native speech. "This sentence is meaningless. You force warriors to play at healing. We will not cooperate." Chen activated the tablet, displaying footage from the Nightingale's final moments. The images showed medical personnel working frantically to stabilize patients, even as the ship broke apart around them. "These people died because you couldn't comprehend what they were doing," she said. "Your cooperation is irrelevant. You will observe. You will assist. Eventually, you will understand. And if we refuse?" asked Tactical Officer Rekvor from the doorway, where guards had allowed the other sentenced officers to gather. Chen looked up, her expression unchanged. "Then you prove us wrong. You demonstrate that Vraxians cannot evolve beyond abandoning the vulnerable. You confirm every argument that was made for your execution." The first weeks of the sentence were marked by passive resistance. The Vraxian officers attended required medical training but refused to participate. They observed procedures with visible disdain, standing apart from human medical staff who regarded them with equal suspicion. Public opinion remained sharply divided. Protesters gathered daily outside the medical training facilities, demanding traditional justice for the fallen. Military families especially felt betrayed by the sentence. Admiral Chen, promoted to oversee the integration program, faced intense criticism. At a press conference 30 days into the program, a reporter asked bluntly, "How can you work with the beings who murdered your colleagues?" Chen's response was broadcast globally, "Because I was a healer before I was a victim. The Nightingale's mission was to preserve life, not take it. I will not betray that mission in seeking justice." The turning point came unexpectedly in the 6th week. During a routine training exercise simulating emergency triage, the medical facility suffered an actual power failure. Life support systems for critical patients switched to backup generators, but the primary oxygen delivery system to the intensive care ward failed. Security footage later showed Kravtov, without prompting, assisting Dr. Patel in manually ventilating an elderly patient while repairs were underway. The Vraxian officer said nothing during the 18-minute procedure, but his actions, preserving a life he would have previously considered expendable, sparked intense debate among his fellow officers. That evening, Lieutenant Vraxor approached Chen in her office. The youngest of the sentenced officers seemed troubled. "The human you assisted today," Chen said before he could speak. "Did you know he was a retired admiral who voted for your execution?" Vraxor's translator clicked as he processed this. "No, does this change the medical protocol?" Chen allowed herself the smallest smile. "No, Lieutenant. It does not change the protocol at all. That's precisely the point." The Mars Colonial Hospital buzzed with activity as emergency transports arrived from the mining disaster. Red dust clung to the injured workers as medical teams rushed them through decontamination and into treatment bays. Dr. Sophia Reyes coordinated triage, her voice steady despite 18 hours on duty. "Kravtov, with me," she called, gesturing to the Vraxian officer who stood observing near the entrance. We have 3 critical patients incoming from Tunnel 7. The Admiral followed, his movements stiff but compliant. 4 months into his sentence, he had progressed from passive resistance to reluctant participation. The mining disaster represented his first major emergency deployment. Patient is male, 42, crush injuries to lower extremities, possible internal bleeding, announced the paramedic as they wheeled in the first miner. BP dropping, pulse steady. Dr. Reyes immediately began assessment while issuing orders. Kravtoth, establish IV access and begin fluid resuscitation. We need to stabilize him before surgery. The Vraxian's clawed hands moved with surprising precision, locating a vein and placing the intravenous line. He had studied human anatomy extensively, finding the process clinically interesting if philosophically objectionable. This one will not survive, he stated flatly, observing the patient's deteriorating vitals. Resources should be directed to those with better prospects. That's not how we operate, Reyes replied without looking up. Everyone gets our best effort. Prep the rapid infuser and get 2 units of blood. As Kravtoth complied, the hospital shuddered. Warning klaxons blared as an automated voice announced, "Structural integrity compromised in sectors 3 through 7. Evacuation protocols initiated." Aftershock from the mine collapse, Reyes explained, continuing to work on her patient. This facility was built on unstable ground. We've dealt with this before. Another tremor, stronger than the first, sent equipment crashing to the floor. The lights flickered ominously. We need to move these patients now, Reyes ordered, gesturing to the staff. Critical cases to the evac shuttles first. As the medical team prepared for transport, Dr. Reyes pulled a pre-filled syringe from her pocket and injected herself. Kravtoth observed this with curiosity. "Stimulant?" he inquired. "Synthetic adrenaline with a metabolic stabilizer," she confirmed, already moving back to her patient. "It'll keep me functioning for another 12 hours at peak capacity." Side effects: liver damage, possible cardiac complications. Worth it if we save everyone. She glanced at him. "Help or evacuate, your choice, Admiral." Another aftershock sent ceiling panels crashing down. A support beam collapse, trapping 3 medical staff and patients in the adjacent treatment bay. Without hesitation, Kravtoth moved toward them, using his superior Vraxian strength to lift the debris. For the next 6 hours, as the hospital gradually collapsed around them, Kravtoth worked alongside Dr. Reyes, moving patients, maintaining life support, and assisting with emergency procedures in increasingly difficult conditions. When evacuation routes were cut off by further collapses, they established a makeshift treatment center in a reinforced storage area. Eventually, rescue teams broke through from the surface. As they began extracting patients, the incident commander ordered all medical personnel to evacuate immediately. "Admiral, you're clear to go," the rescue leader told Kravtoth. "Priority transport waiting." Kravtoth looked at the remaining patients, then at Dr. Reyes. The human physician was clearly struggling now, the stimulants wearing off, her movements becoming unsteady. "I will remain until all patients are evacuated," he stated. Later, in his mandatory report to Commander Chen, Kravtoth struggled to articulate his decision. "The tactical advantage of preserving medical personnel became clear," he wrote. "Dr. Reyes damaged herself to save others. This efficiency requires further study." Chen noted the hesitation in his phrasing. It wasn't the sentiment of a converted healer, but it was a start. The isolation ward of New Jakarta Colonial Hospital had been converted into a joint species treatment centre, its environment carefully balanced between human and Vraxian atmospheric preferences. Lieutenant Vraxor checked the quarantine seals on his protective gear before entering the high-security zone. Behind the transparent barriers, rows of beds held the infected, humans and Vraxians suffering from the engineered pathogen that had swept through the colony in less than a week. The disease was cruelly efficient, causing massive internal hemorrhaging that manifested differently in each species but was equally devastating. Vraxor approached the monitoring station where Dr. Hassan was reviewing blood analysis results. The human physician looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes betraying that she had barely slept in days. The protein marker we isolated from patient 7 shows promising resistance, she told him without looking up. I need samples from every Vraxian patient who's showing even minimal improvement. Our biology is not meant to be studied this way. Vraxor objected, though his tone lacked its earlier hostility. Vraxian medical data is classified by imperial decree. Dr. Hassan finally looked at him, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and determination. Lieutenant, I've lost 17 patients today. 8 humans, 9 Vraxians. I don't have time for cultural sensitivities. She handed him a collection kit. Either help me save your people, or return to your quarters and watch them die with appropriate Vraxian dignity. Something in her bluntness reminded him of his own military instructors. Vraxor took the kit and moved toward the Vraxian ward without further argument. Over the next 3 days, they established a rhythm. Dr. Hassan developed treatment protocols while Vraxor, with his knowledge of Vraxian physiology, implemented and refined them. They spoke little beyond medical necessities, but gradually a professional respect developed. On the 4th night, Vraxor found Dr. Hassan slumped over her workstation, a half-finished analysis on her screen. Initial scans showed she had contracted the pathogen, likely due to a microscopic breach in her protective gear. For several moments, he stood frozen in uncertainty. Vraxian military code was clear. The fallen were to be left to recover on their own strength or perish with honor. Intervention was reserved for the most valuable military assets, and even then, it was considered a mark of weakness to accept such help. But Dr. Hassan wasn't Vraxian, and she had not abandoned his people when she could have prioritized her own. Vraxor activated the emergency medical protocol she had designed for human patients. His clawed hands, once trained only for weapons systems, now moved through the treatment steps with practiced precision. He administered the stabilizing agents, established intravenous support, and carefully monitored her response to treatment. "What are you doing?" asked a human nurse who discovered him at Hassan's bedside an hour later. Implementing her protocol, Vraxor replied simply. She would do the same. For 36 hours, he remained by her side, only leaving to tend to critical Vraxian patients. When Security Chief Petal questioned his dedication to a single patient, Vraxor's response was recorded in the official log. Dr. Hassan possesses knowledge that could save hundreds. Losing her expertise would be tactically unsound. When she finally regained consciousness, Hassan found the Vraxian lieutenant reviewing her latest research notes at her bedside. On the screen beside him was a modified treatment protocol that combined her approach with elements of classified Vraxian military medical techniques. "You accessed restricted Imperial medical files," she observed, her voice weak but clear. Vraxor nodded once. The protocol was incomplete without them. "Why break your military code for this?" The Vraxian was silent for a long moment before answering. Some codes must evolve to remain relevant. The medical station's emergency lighting cast everything in a crimson glow as another impact rocked the structure. Admiral Kravtoth steadied himself against a bulkhead, watching as human medical staff continued their evacuation procedures with remarkable efficiency. Approaching vessels are not responding to diplomatic channels, reported the station's A. Vraxian battle formation confirmed. Outer shields at 38%. Commander Chen appeared at his side, a portable medical kit slung across her shoulder. Your people are determined to rescue you, Admiral. Decision time. Kravtoth studied the tactical display. The attacking Vraxian fleet had positioned itself to minimize damage to the section where the sentenced officers were typically stationed. Their intentions were clear: extract their military leaders and destroy the medical facility afterward. Evacuation status, he asked, his voice steady. 63 patients still awaiting transport, including 22 Vraxians, Chen replied. We need at least 30 more minutes to complete evacuation. The Admiral accessed the communication console, entering his personal command codes. For a moment, Chen tensed, perhaps wondering if he would provide tactical advantages to the attackers. Instead, his message was brief and clear. This is Admiral Kravtoth to Squadron Commander Dravkon. You target a medical facility. This dishonors the Imperium and violates the Warrior's Code. Stand down immediately. The response came swiftly, the Vraxian words translated by the station's system. Admiral, we come to end your degradation. Prepare for extraction. The human facility will be neutralized as per Imperial Directive 37. Kravtoth's scaled skin darkened with what Chen had come to recognize as the Vraxian equivalent of anger. He turned to his fellow officers who had gathered nearby, speaking rapidly in their native tongue. The universal translator struggled to keep pace. They come under pretense of honor while targeting healers. What honor exists in destroying those who cannot defend themselves? What tactical advantage is gained by eliminating medical knowledge that could serve the Imperium? The 5 officers exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between warriors who had served together for decades. Lieutenant Vraxor spoke first. The humans would not abandon their vulnerable. Perhaps we should not abandon them. Another impact shook the station more violently. Shield breach in Sector 4, announced the AA. Emergency bulkheads engaged. That's the primary evacuation route, Chen realized, already moving. We need to reroute patients through secondary corridors. To her surprise, all 6 Vraxian officers moved with purpose, Kravtoth issuing rapid instructions. Rekfor, secure the path to evacuation shuttles. Vraxor, assist with Vraxian patient transport. Zaltek, coordinate defense of critical systems. As the Vraxians dispersed to their assigned tasks, Chen caught Kravtoth's arm. You could have left with them, ended your sentence 3 years early. The Admiral's expression remained unreadable to human eyes, but his voice carried an unfamiliar emotion. They target healers. I allowed this once. I will not allow it again. In the hours that followed, human and Vraxian medical staff worked alongside the sentenced officers to evacuate patients and essential personnel. When a section collapsed, trapping 3 human nurses, it was Kravtoth who led the rescue effort, using his superior Vraxian strength to clear debris while maintaining life support systems. Station security cameras captured footage of the Admiral carrying injured humans to evacuation shuttles, his uniform stained with both human and Vraxian blood. One particular image of Kravtoth shielding a human child with his own body during a structural collapse would later become iconic. As the final evacuation shuttle prepared for departure, Commander Chen found Kravtoth establishing a makeshift command center in what remained of the medical bay. "Last shuttle leaves in 5 minutes," she informed him. "That's an order, Admiral." Kravtov looked up from the tactical display. "I will follow shortly. There are still patients requiring stabilization before transport." "And if the station fails before then?" The Vraxian's response was simple but profound. "Then I die as a healer rather than live as the warrior who once targeted them." The Interspecies Medical Academy's laboratory hummed with activity as researchers from both civilizations worked side by side. 5 years into the sentence, what had begun as punishment had evolved into something unprecedented. A genuine collaboration between species who had nearly gone to war. Admiral Chen observed through the observation window as Kravtov demonstrated a Vraxian technique for neuroregeneration to a group of human medical students. His scaled hands moved with practiced precision over holographic displays of damaged nerve tissue. "His daughter arrives tomorrow," Dr. Rivera noted, joining Chen at the window. The Vraxian High Command finally approved her application after 3 rejections. "They're calling it a diplomatic concession," Chen replied, "but we both know what it really is." "Progress," Rivera agreed. The request from Sub-Commander Zeltov had created ripples through both human and Vraxian society. No Vraxian of military rank had ever formally requested medical training before. For a high-ranking officer to seek such knowledge from humans was unprecedented. That evening, Chen found Kravtov in the Academy's garden, a space designed to accommodate both human and Vraxian plant species. The Admiral stood contemplating a hybrid flower that researchers had created by combining DNA from both worlds. "Your daughter's shuttle docks at 700, Chen informed him. "I've arranged private quarters for her near yours." Kravtov nodded acknowledgement. "The Imperium sent observers with her. They claim it's for her protection, but we both know they come to monitor this experiment. Are you concerned?" The Vraxian turned to face her. "In our culture, a warrior who embraces healing is considered diminished. I have accepted this diminishment as the cost of knowledge. My daughter would face the same judgment. Yet she chose to come anyway." She observed the Battle of Mercy footage. "That image," he paused. "The one of me carrying the human child to safety." She said it made her question everything she had been taught about strength. Chen had seen the impact of that image herself. The picture of Kravtov, former enemy of humanity, using his body to shield a human child from falling debris, had become a powerful symbol. It had been reproduced in artwork, educational materials, and political discourse across both civilizations. "The High Command fears what is happening here," Kravtov continued. "They approved her request not as a concession, but as a test. They believe she will witness my degradation and report that this medical exchange weakens Vraxian strength. And what do you believe she will see?" The Admiral's gaze returned to the hybrid flower. "I believe she will see what I have seen, that there is strength in healing that we have denied ourselves for generations." The following morning, Chen stood alongside Kravtov as the shuttle docked. Sub-Commander Zeltov emerged, her military bearing impeccable despite the obvious discomfort of the Vraxian officials flanking her. She approached her father and offered the traditional Vraxian military salute. Kravtov returned it, then surprised everyone by also extending his hand in the human gesture of greeting. After a moment's hesitation, his daughter took it. "Welcome to the Interspecies Medical Academy," he said formally. "Here we learn that some battles are fought not against enemies, but against injury and disease." Zeltov's response was measured but clear. The footage from the Battle of Mercy has circulated widely among younger officers. Many question why we abandoned the healing arts generations ago. She glanced at the Vraxian observers before adding, I am not the only one seeking answers. Later, reviewing Zeltoth's entrance examinations, Chen found herself impressed. The young Vraxian had already begun studying human medical texts independently, preparing herself long before her application was approved. She comes seeking more than just knowledge, Chen remarked to Kravtoth. She comes seeking transformation. As did we all, the Admiral replied, though some of us required more persuasion than others. The quarantine zone on Corvash stretched across an entire continent, its borders marked by shimmering containment fields visible from orbit. Inside, millions of Vraxians struggled against a pathogen that exploited the very medical advances that had begun bridging their civilization with humanity's. Admiral Eliza Chen strode through the decontamination chamber of the Joint Medical Facility, the most advanced ever established on Vraxian soil. Beside her walked Kravtoth, now in the 8th year of his sentence, and bearing the unique insignia of a Vraxian medical commander, a rank created specifically for him and his fellow officers. The virus targets the enzyme receptors we developed to make human treatments compatible with Vraxian physiology, explained Dr. Karbimandite, the lead human virologist. It's using our medical bridge as its pathway. A cruel irony, Chen observed. Our attempt to heal across species has created a vulnerability. There is another possibility, Kravtoth suggested quietly. This may be deliberate. The thought had occurred to Chen as well. The confluence virus appeared too precisely engineered to be natural. Its attack vector too specifically targeted at the medical compatibility between humans and Vraxians. Someone wanted to sever the growing connection between the species. The Imperial archives might contain information that could help, Kravtoth continued. Ancient medical knowledge from before the Great Militarization. My genetic signature still grants access. The journey to the Vraxian capital required special dispensation from both governments. The sentenced officers had never been permitted to return to their homeworld during their punishment. Now necessity overrode protocol. The Imperial Archive stood at the heart of the ancient city, its architecture reflecting the stark military aesthetics of Vraxian culture. Inside, Kravtoth led Chen and a small team of researchers through security checkpoints, his presence drawing shocked stares from Vraxian officials unaccustomed to seeing one of their kind in medical insignia rather than military rank. The archives we seek are in the restricted section, he explained, approaching a genetic scanner. Information deemed irrelevant to military advancement was segregated centuries ago. The scanner hummed as it read his genetic signature, then beeped in confirmation. Admiral Kravtoth, access granted. Warning, your security clearance has been flagged for review. Beyond the massive security doors lay a vast chamber filled with data crystals, each containing knowledge deemed non-essential to the Vraxian military state. Kravtoth moved directly to a section marked with ancient symbols. These contain medical knowledge from the pre-unification era, he explained. Before our society prioritized military expansion above all else. As they accessed the crystals, holographic displays illuminated the chamber. Images appeared showing Vraxian healers tending to injured comrades, using techniques remarkably similar to human medical practices. This cannot be, whispered Zaltek, one of the sentenced officers who had accompanied them. We were taught that weakness was always abandoned. A constructed history, Kravtoth replied, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Our ancestors were healers before they were conquerors. Chen studied the ancient medical texts as they were translated. These techniques, they're sophisticated. Your people understood surgical intervention, pharmacological treatment, rehabilitation. And then abandoned it all, Kravtoth said bitterly. deemed inefficient for a species focused on conquest. The strong would survive without intervention. The weak would perish, strengthening our genetic line. As they delved deeper into the archives, they discovered something unexpected: ancient Vraxian research on viral countermeasures that had been developed during an era when their ancestors faced similar cross-species infections. This could be the key, Chen realized. Your ancestors faced something like the confluence virus before, during your early contact with other species, and developed treatments that didn't require abandoning the infected, Kraftoth added, studying the ancient formulas. Treatments are modern medicine discarded as unnecessary coddling of the weak. When they emerged from the archives hours later, Kraftoth carried data crystals containing knowledge his civilization had buried for centuries. His expression was resolute as he addressed the waiting research team. "We have forgotten who we once were," he said. "It is time to remember." The ceremony at the Nightingale Memorial Hospital drew to its climactic moment as Admiral Eliza Chen stood before the 6 Vraxian officers who had completed their sentences. Behind them, rows of graduates from the First Joint Medical Academy waited in perfect formation, their uniforms combining elements from both human and Vraxian design. 10 years ago, these officers destroyed a vessel of healing. Chen addressed the gathered dignitaries and the billions watching across multiple worlds. Today, they have rebuilt something greater in its place. She approached each officer, beginning with the junior ranks. Lieutenant Vraxor, who had once fired the weapons that destroyed the Nightingale, stood rigidly as she presented him with the 2 symbolic items: his original military insignia and a medical caduceus. "Choose," she said simply. Without hesitation, Vraxor selected the caduceus. A murmur rippled through the assembled dignitaries, particularly among the Vraxian military representatives who had expected their officers to reclaim their military ranks upon completing their sentences. One by one, the other officers made the same choice, each placing the caduceus on their uniform where military rank insignia had once been displayed. Finally, only Kraftoth remained. "Admiral," Chen said, offering him the same choice. Kraftoth studied both items carefully. Then, to everyone's surprise, he took both the military insignia and the caduceus. "In our past, before the great militarization," he explained, his voice carrying to all present, "Vraxian healers were also warriors. They protected with both strength and knowledge. I choose to reclaim this dual heritage." He placed both symbols on his uniform, the military insignia and the caduceus side by side. A true protector must know both how to defend and how to heal. The Vraxian military delegation shifted uncomfortably, but could find no protocol to object to an admiral's decision. The human representatives, meanwhile, broke into spontaneous applause. President Okafor, who had delivered the original sentence 10 years earlier, now approached with the formal document that would establish the Healers' Accord, a permanent medical exchange and research zone between human and Vraxian space. "This document does more than end a sentence," she announced. "It begins a partnership. Where once we nearly went to war, we now unite in healing." As Kraftoth signed for the Vraxian delegation, his daughter Zeltoth stood among the Academy graduates. In 10 years, she had risen to become valedictorian of the first interspecies medical class, her research on cross-species neural regeneration already saving lives across multiple civilizations. After the formal ceremony concluded, Chen found Kraftoth in the memorial garden, standing before the holographic display of the original Nightingale crew. 47 faces looked out from the eternal memorial, medical personnel who had died trying to save a Vraxian dignitary who collapsed during first contact. Do you think they would approve of what grew from their sacrifice? Kravtoth asked quietly. Chen considered the question carefully. They were healers. They dedicated their lives to preserving life and alleviating suffering. I believe they would see the Accord as the ultimate validation of their mission. When I gave the order to fire on your vessel, Kravtoth said, I believed I was upholding Vraxin honor by preventing what I saw as weakness. I couldn't have imagined that one day I would understand strength so differently. Beyond the Memorial Garden's windows, construction was already underway on the expanded interspecies medical complex. Research facilities, teaching hospitals, and treatment centers would soon fill the neutral zone established by the Accord. 10 years ago you sentenced us to become healers as punishment, Kravtoth observed. What happens now that we choose this path willingly? Chen smiled. Now we heal together.